Hi folks, welcome to Hat Friday. Stuart remembered, everybody else forgot. I've got an excuse. I've just spent 3 hours at the Royal Infirmary. Today we're going to have a chat about Boris's intrusion into the life of Scotland yesterday. We're going to talk about a piece Kenny MacAskill has written, and we're going to have a wee chat about the indie list parties, not necessarily in that order. Got Jimmy Hutton with me today. Hello, Jimmy.
Afternoon, Norman.
And Stuart Lockhead.
Hi there, Stuart Lockhead here.
And I'm Norris Stewart. What will we start with? The Kenny MacAskill piece.
Yeah, well, it's a good place as any to start, I think.
What did you think, Jim?
It was an interesting piece, mate. I found it a bit, vanilla. Probably the most interesting thing about it was published on Wings rather than the Scotsman. I'm assuming this was a draft for his Scotsman article and he got it sent back saying, "Gone, no bother, find something a bit more interesting." He's got a couple of interesting takes on parliamentary tactics at Westminster. It kind of sums up his first few months as a Westminster MP after his time in Holyrood, obviously. And I don't know, mate. I think Kenny may be losing relevance somewhat to, certainly from what a lot of what the Yes movement and the SNP as a party. I think he's kind of an outlier on both of those things now. What about you, Stuart?
Oh, I was disappointed. I used to go down the Edinburgh SNP club on a Friday night and drink beer with Kenny, and that was a lifetime ago. I tell you why it was shocking to start with, to find an SNP MP being published on Wings, given the animosity that the authorities at the SNP have towards Wings. And then I thought, well, this is going to be challenging. I was surprised how little challenging went on. It quite clearly taken on board the sort of typical criticism that a lot of us have on the Yes campaign about how basically our MPs are the forgotten 40 or whatever name they came up with. They're ignored. In fact, worse than that, they're barracked, and it's embarrassing to watch when you watch it on television. And yet Kenny sort of he references goes all the way back to Gordon Wilson and Donald Stewart, way back when it was really tough for them. And he explains one or two things, but at the end of the day, he references Sinn Féin. Now, Sinn Féin officially don't turn up at Westminster. They get voted in Northern Ireland, but they do actually have offices there, and they do constituency work. In other words, their constituents don't lose out because they don't appear in the chamber. And there we had, but basically we've got Kenny just saying, well, there's no, it's not even saying, oh, look, don't forget he's supposed to be Alex Salmond's best buddy. But Kenny, he never even referenced, Alex Salmond used to know every rule that you could twist, every procedure that you could use. He never even suggested doing that. So he gave them, in the end, he gave the impression he'd sold out.
I think it's, I thought it was just, as I say, I thought it was a bit vanilla, a bit bland. And he hints at possibly using similar tactics to the Irish MPs used 100 years ago, and then says, but we don't have the balance of power in that way. He then also hints at perhaps we should just not turn up as much and just not be involved, not give them the oxygen, not give Westminster the respect that Westminster demands. And then doesn't he go down that route? As I say, he holds these options out to you and then doesn't explore them very well. So all in all, as I say, I think it was a rough draft of something he was putting together for the Scotsman, and they've knocked it back. I just found it dull.
I hadn't thought of that until you explained it, but now it kind of makes sense because it's surprisingly how bland it is, given that it's published on Wings.
Mm-hmm. Like you say, if an SNP member, even an SNP member, never mind a representative, publishing on Wings, I spotted it and thought, oh, this is going to be fun, and it just wasn't.
I haven't read it. As I say, I've been up at the hospital all morning. So the impression I get from you two guys, it sounds almost as if he's given up the ghost. It sounds as if the tactic of just basically ignoring the SNP might be having an effect on Kenny.
I think it might be, mate. We've talked in the past about bringing some of that talent back up the road, because there is talent on those benches. And it'd be nice to have them in Holyrood, but at the same time, if we don't appear, if we don't have loud voices in Westminster decrying everything that they're doing to us, it feels a wee bit like you're giving up the ghost. It feels a wee bit like you're handing them a rubber stamp and just letting them do what they will. So, and let's be honest, all of us have been kind of critical about Ian Blackford's performance these last few months. It'd be nice to think that in the summer recess, the SNP group might get together and say, listen, we need to revitalise things here. Yeah. We need to upset this lot in some way. And if Ian isn't the man to do it, let's find the woman or man that is the person to do it.
I was shouting at Ian Blackford. He was being interviewed on TV last night. Oh, God, he was awful. I ended up, Ian, I was shouting. It's like, he was rubbish. I have got a little quote here that makes kind of sense of Kenny and MacAskill's sting. He talks about, do you remember when they first, must have been, which election was it? 2015? The SNP were in 48.
56 to 59, wasn't it?
And when they first went into the chamber, they sat in the, remember they sat in the Labour benches?
Yeah.
To make a statement, we are the effective opposition. So Kenny mentions that, but that could never happen again. And he doesn't explain why.
Well, I mean, I think he's got a fair point. I mean, this is a whole different ballgame. You've got an 80-seat majority for the Tories. And in effect, the Tories are now in a dictatorship. If the Tory backbenchers do not fight the front bench, nobody else can. If the front bench depends on their support, gets their support for everything they want to do, we're effectively a dictatorship until the next general election.
Yeah, well, you know how we sort of worry here in Scotland about the powers of Holyrood being nibbled away. Now, what about the Labour opposition in Westminster? Are they not aware of their powers being nibbled away?
They're quite happily to hand them over at times, mate.
Yeah, but they work on the principle that one day they'll get power back. I mean, they believe that.
Will. I mean,
well, maybe they won't. I mean, that's not what I mean, though. They're not that keen on taking power away from the government.
You know, look at
because one day they could be the government.
There must have been a sunbeam hit me in the eye while I was out this afternoon, and I came in, and for some strange reason, I had the notion that, you know what, this Labour Party, 50 years of my adult life, since 1971, they had about 1 or 2 years, the first couple of years of Tony Blair. Apart from that, they've been a waste of time. You know, they really should just fold, and maybe somebody could start a better social democratic party.
Folk have tried that, mate. Doesn't it work?
Well, their big idea's been implemented, which is the National Health Service. Now,
oh no, I'm taking that as read. I'm just talking not the last 75 years, only the last 50. Surely 50 years is long enough to wait for a party to actually come up and do something that's remotely like what they promise.
But this is a party that continually reminds us that the National Health Service was their baby.
This is a party
they think they've done their job.
This is a party that continually remind us how useless they are at getting into power and effectively making changes that the people want.
No, what it is a party that effectively manages to pull the wool over the eyes of the great British public who think that we live in a democracy. The Labour Party is, since the demise of the Liberal Party, since the Labour Party rose in the early part of the 20th century, their sole, well, not their sole reason for being, but their sole role really is to play the left-wing part of the UK establishment, so that when the Tories make an absolute pig's ear of things, we have something different to vote for a few years, and we think that we're getting something different.
No, I mean,
Take a look at what they do when they're in power. They're not in any way, shape, or form a socialist party.
No, they're not. Do you know what's occurred to me? Is, you know, the first Labour Prime Minister was Ramsay MacDonald. Now, without going into the details of that period, very soon the Labour Party were in coalition in national governments with the Tories, and through, of course, successfully through World War II. The only time they actually won was as a reaction to winning World War II, when World War II, what the people of Britain experienced was a kind of a state-run government, which is why they were ready, you know, they were ready for nationalised industries, because they need, you know, they were used to having everything run by the government.
But that's all been undone.
Well, they've never done anything remotely like it since.
Well, the point is that they stood by and let it get undone. The unions got deballed. The nationalised industries got sold off. You know, it's all been undone. And the Labour Party has done nothing to try and save it.
And just to refer it back up the road to Scotland, the Labour Party in Scotland busily tell us that the SNP, in fact, quite a few supposed independent supporters keep telling us that the SNP's moved so far to the right. The SNP are the only party that are talking about state intervention. They're the only interventionist party in Holyrood.
Well, they've done it. They're not just talking about it.
Aye, they've done it, but they want the freedom to do far more of it. So when people in your lefty liberal essayists tell you that the SNP are a party of the right, don't believe them. If they were a party of the right, that shipyard through in Glasgow would be shut by now.
Exactly.
You wouldn't have a Prestwick airport. You know what I mean? There are ways.
BIFAB.
Aye, there are ways and means that this SNP government, should it achieve the independence that it wants to achieve, could make Scotland a far better country to live in. But I think the voices of the left in Scotland, they didn't actually want that. They just want to be. There's a lot of them that just want to be right on, man. They just want to be Woolfie in the 1970s and live out some sad wee existence. They don't want power, and they don't want to affect people's lives, because they know that their ideas and the stuff that they espouse are absolute horseshit.
So are we going to talk about our esteemed leader's visit to the Northern Isles and Baxter? Look,
Aye.
I think he's been talking to Kevin Haig, the pet food salesman, because he went along to Baxter's and he's now selling tins of soup.
Aye.
Where did he all go? He went to an army base where demonstrators aren't allowed.
He flew into an army base, then he went up to Orkney, then he went to Baxter's.
He went to Lossiemouth Air Station and went to Baxter's. Where else did you send it?
Well, that's what I'm asking. He didn't go anywhere where he would find people who could possibly disagree with him.
No.
So he's taken a leaf straight out of May's playbook, and he could as well have been at a wee cottage in the middle of a forest as May was.
It was absolutely a completely stage managed thing. That'd be that, what's his face, Luke whoever, the failed MP that's kind of running their Scotland strategy for number 10. Barry, he met a few fishermen. They'd have been handpicked. Absolute guarantee they'd have been handpicked.
And then he held up a couple of crabs.
Mm-hmm.
So he was doing. Who was famous all about? Oh no, it's the Lib Dem fellow here in Scotland. Always getting photographs with animals, wasn't it? Embarrassing ones.
Willie Rennie.
Willie Rennie.
I have no idea what two crabs making the beast with two backs looks like.
Well, exactly. It's the first time Boris has had crabs on his fingernails with it itching.
Oh, he's very good.
Seriously, that was completely stage managed. The visit to Baxter's completely stage managed. They came out and absolutely in independence, backed better together. And obviously on an army base, sorry, but that's completely stage managed as well, because he's ordered to clap and cheer. I noticed that a couple of Tory MPs took to Twitter to tell you how popular Boris is and how much clapping and cheering they had. You're going to hear that on an army base because these people are told to do it. You're going to hear that if you've got the local membership for the Orkney Conservative Party turning out to clap and cheer when he's standing on a fishing boat.
Has Orkney got a Conservative Party?
I think they'll probably have a Conservative club, mate, but that's probably just for cheap booze and interfering with their cousins.
There were 5 in the photograph they published themselves of the welcoming party. What was it they said? We've covered this already.
They were harping back to "We said no."
Aye.
Won't you listen?
Aye.
So I'm going to presume that even 24 hours later, that we don't think it was a successful visit, and it hasn't saved the union.
No, I think when you've got the Guardian coming out and writing a piece this morning saying that it was a successful visit for the SNP, then you know roughly what's happened. I was surprised by some of the things our broadcasters carried last night, though. They interviewed people on the streets in places either where he'd been or where he was supposedly heading.
Were you watching RT, Russia Today, by any chance?
No, not at all, mate. I was watching BBC and Channel 4 and STV, and all of them carried stuff that normally they wouldn't. Yeah. You know, the rebuttals of the Boris line that I've given you all this money, and genuinely members of the public were saying, hold it, it's either our money or our taxes will be used to pay it back because it's borrowed. Normally, if they interview someone like that in the street, they won't transmit it.
No, look, that's heartening, because I looked at 2 articles written by London correspondents. One for the Guardian, I think John Christ, not John Crace, somebody a bit like that, and another one for the Independent. Of course, I worry about both these so-called left-wing newspapers. One of them is owned by a Russian oligarch, and the other one's run by the MI5. So goodness knows. However, they both made an assumption that they're not entitled to make, which is that Scotland is doesn't wash its face financially. Mm. Simon Jenkins was one of them. He'll be in the Guardian, I would imagine. And although that both these articles were very sympathetic to the case for Scottish independence, especially given the Brexit vote and the state of the management of the economy, the state of the management of the pandemic, you know, the fact that Boris Johnson is useless. They were both very sympathetic, but they both made this completely a false assumption that Scotland couldn't afford to be independent, couldn't have afforded to furlough all these people. It would be, and one of them was going on about how it would be awful. They couldn't afford to borrow any money. They couldn't do what the Bank of England did and printed money. Well, there's one simple solution to that one. On the day that independence is announced, there should be a Reserve Bank of Scotland printing our own money, and Bob's your uncle. You can print as much money as you like.
Yeah, and it always stuns me that what they need to do is look at how big a hole in GDP Scotland leaving would create. That's the way you do it. That's the way.
You bang on. There's so many economic arguments out there. I've seen a couple of pieces this week. One where Peter Bell argues, stop coming up with plans for currency and stop coming up with plans for debt, and that didn't even engage in those arguments. And another one where somebody says we need to have an argument for absolutely everything that's thrown at us in the next referendum campaign. I would say somewhere in the middle, we kind of need to have an argument, but at the end of the day, a good answer is, what do you mean? If we're going to be campaigning for independence and campaigning against the union, you don't need an answer on currency. You don't need an answer on debt. But what we have is things to throw at them, such as Boris going on about 160 billion yesterday, and it's almost the same as Scotland's GDP. Nobody ever asked Boris a question. Why does Whitehall get to tell us that our GDP is less than half of that of Denmark, Norway, or Ireland?
And whose fault would that be if it's true?
Exactly. If that is true, it's a damning indictment of what the union has created for Scotland over the last 3 centuries. I don't believe for a second it's true. I believe that the world's best false accountants work in Whitehall.
I do think we got one advantage from Boris and the Tories coming up here. That's their argument. Everything else they've got has gone because it's been lied about. They've no argument about the EU now, and they've no argument about pensions now. The only argument they've got is Scotland would be too poor, and I'm pretty sure we can blow that one sky high.
I'm pretty sure that a lot of Scots will find that remarkably offensive as well, mate. If that's going to be the basis of their argument, by the way, you're too skint and too stupid to do it on your own.
Oh, I mean, I think didn't Nicola herself use that? You know, we were too small, too wee, too poor, and too stupid. No,
exactly.
We're not. I have to take issue with you, Jimmy, about the question of. I think Peter Bell's right when he goes on about we should be focusing on dissolving the union, because what struck me yesterday was the number of times that Boris Johnson has titled himself the Minister for the Union. Every time he opened his mouth yesterday in Scotland, he was there to save the Union. And he's playing into Peter Bell's ballpark there.
Aye,
so that instead of talking about independence, we should be talking about breaking the Union.
I'd agree to an extent, mate. He's also playing to that third, I would say, the Scottish population that genuinely class themselves as unionists. You know, everyone from a soft no who might come our way, right to the hardcore lambeg thumping, sash-wearing gonads that come from central Scotland and jump on buses to go marching in Ireland every year. He's playing to that particular audience by constantly using the word union. And I'm happy for him to play to that audience, because we're never going to get some of their votes anyway. We can get a few, but not many. But the reality of what's marching up the path economically, the unemployment that we're going to see because of COVID, and then the hammer blow of either a no-deal Brexit or such a crappy deal that's cobbled together in the last couple of months that it makes no odds it'd be as well as being no deal.
Look, there is still one other aspect of Peter Bell's position on we should be fighting to break the union rather than to strive for independence. Breaking the union is fairly clear. That's simply one thing.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Whereas independence is there's about 1,000 different views on what independence
Stuart,
would be.
no, I'm sorry. You've got that upside down. Independence is easy to understand. We wish to be independent.
I know you want a wee Rammie, but...
No, this is nothing about a Rammie. You define dissolving the union.
Well,
show me the path to it.
You first. Do you define
it's easy. We hold a referendum on independence, and if we vote yes, we get our independence.
What does independence mean in this modern world?
We're independent from Westminster.
You know, all you got to do with it, we're in a union that is clearly not working. It is not working for Scotland. It's not working for England, to be honest. And all we really need to do is dissolve the union one way or another. Legally, I'm not saying UDI.
No. What? Okay, you tell me how we dissolve the union legally.
But it also makes it easier for campaigning.
Don't ignore the question. You tell me how you dissolve the union.
Because that's all that it's a simple issue to fight on. It's a lot easier than campaigning on that.
Tell me how to dissolve the union.
Okay, they have a referendum that you're going to dissolve. They're going to dissolve the union. You're going to say to the UK government, right? We've had enough of this, and then we're going to have a referendum on any deal we get. We strike with the UK government. So you have two referendums, which is quite, a lot of people are quite happy to go for that.
And that doesn't make it twice as complicated and mean you have to spend twice as much time arguing about it, of course.
Well, at the end of the day, I think, given when you and I, Nora, have both got experience of the first EU referendum, I assume. First of all, they negotiated a deal, and then we went in, and let me finish. And then they had a referendum on the deal we got.
Stuart, you've now upped the ante to two referendums. Both of which could be lost. So instead of having one referendum on whether we want to be independent or not, we've got a dissolve the union referendum and then a referendum on what the terms of that dissolution is. So you've made it doubly complicated right away.
I would say, I think, well, you could promise the second referendum. You might never need it. You know, you could have the public acclaim saying, "Come on, this is great."
And that's not complicating or muddying the waters at all.
People could be on the streets waving flags. They'll be packing down.
Sure, I'm sorry. I mean, as a slogan for a referendum, dissolve the union is not nearly as good as yes or no. And you're arriving at exactly the same place, just calling it a different name.
All right. The problem is at the moment with voting for independence, apparently we have to also vote for a slate of policies.
I didn't think we should.
Whoa.
No, I didn't think we do. I think what we need to do.
Well, we have to argue.
Have something similar to the last time. Should Scotland be an independent country?
That's it.
Why change the question that people have answered once before and then argued about for the last 6 years? We've argued about the exact same thing as to whether Scotland should or should not be independent.
Now we moved on to what the question should be of a referendum.
Stuart, do you seriously think that if we have a referendum on dissolving the union, people won't ask the same questions?
Well, there you go. Possibly they will, but
of course they will.
Right, but I'm actually, the reason I'm leaning that way is that because what I'm very keen to see is none of this rubbish with people voting for policies. Well, what is the policy going to be once you get independence? Every damn policy, it's confusing the issue.
But Stuart, it's not confusing the issue because people are still going to ask the questions. Whether or not you want them to ask the questions doesn't matter. They're still going to be asked during the campaign.
Oh, so we're going to have hate crime legislation? Are we going to have anti-abortion legislation?
No, that's an SNP policy, mate. What are you babbling on about the hate crime policy for? That's nothing to do with independence.
You're saying you're saying all kinds of policies could come up.
All kinds of policies can come up in any parliament, anywhere in the world. Every single day, policy is put forward and discussed. But during the independence campaign, the hate crimes bill would play a diddy wee part. The questions that people will ask will be the same ones they asked the last time.
Yeah, all right then. Okay.
And it doesn't matter whether you frame it as a referendum to dissolve the union or a referendum for independence, because they are both the same result.
So you're quite happy you're quite happy having things like the Growth Commission report, which really did an awful lot of damage to the prospect.
It did an awful lot of damage because the commentariat tore it apart piece by piece. It was never policy. It was there to inform policy. Right. And frankly, it's a piece of work that probably needed done to see.
Well, let's find out if Norrie also
would be thrown apart by all these liberal academics.
Stuart, don't go putting words in my mouth.
Well, let's find out what Norrie thinks about the Growth Commission. Do you think that was a good plan?
Stuart, I wasn't talking about the Growth Commission. You're doing what you always do. You haven't got an argument to justify changing a yes/no independence referendum into a dissolve the union referendum. So now you want to talk about the Growth Commission.
No, that wasn't me that brought it up. That was Jimmy. And now you're putting words into my mouth again.
You brought up the Growth Commission, Stuart, not Jimmy.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay.
Right?
All right, I've got lost. I give in.
Right. So essentially, you couldn't find a way out because you didn't have an answer. You've lost the argument.
Okay, I've lost the argument today.
Right. We were talking about Boris and having a good wee giggle, particularly at the likes of Murdo. And I noticed Jamie Halcrow Johnston, was it? That double-barreled fud anyway, was tweeting nonsense about Boris and that, and he got absolutely roasted on Twitter. It was actually hilarious to watch. I didn't realise he was quite so unelectable in his constituency that he got 435 votes. we Annie Wells got 5 times as many votes as this clown got, and he got in on the list. And I believe he's the only sitting MSP who was elected on the list and managed to lose his deposit in the same election. So kudos to him for that. But honestly, if you've got Twitter guys, go on there. It's Halcrow something or other. But it's worth having a look at his timeline for this last few days because it is hilarious.
Yes, he was tweeting that Orkney was the most unionist constituency in Britain. I found that hard to believe, given that there's all these constituencies in Northern Ireland.
I was going to say, Stuart, there'll be a few fists go through the big Lambeg and Ulster this weekend if you read that, eh?
I saw some statistics about Orkney yesterday from the Tories, which I found very, very difficult to believe. It's not the place I thought it was, if they're true, put it that way. Right, guys, come on. What was the other thing we were going to talk about? I forgot.
We were going to talk about the list parties, mate.
Yeah.
I sent you guys, it's a right long-winded thing that I came across today. It's one of these things on Facebook, and folk describe themselves, this is a long read, and you're in for 10 or 15 minutes.
Well, it's not just a long read. Look at the number of tables on it.
Aye, but it's on medium.com, and it's called Tactical Voting in the Scottish Parliament Election, a Mass Delusion Deconstructed. I mean, by that title, you kind of ken what you're getting yourself into. But it goes on and on and on and on and on. But the guy does put some pretty convincing mathematical tables in front of you, showing you just how difficult it's going to be for these list parties to make the considerable impact that they're claiming that they're going to make. Straight away, looking at some of these tables, if they take seats, in most scenarios, they're going to take seats either from the SNP or the Greens. So they're not making a huge difference to the majority that independent supporting parties will have. Going by the polls, I expect the SNP to do extraordinarily well in next year's election. And I think these list parties are just a distraction. I think the fact that we've got 4 or 5 now that are popping up is deliberately distracting, because the constituency vote that they're not going to take part in, the SNP will win. So they're there on the list to take seats, and I think they'll take seats off the Greens and the SNP. I don't see them taking many seats of the Tories or Labour. Have a look at that.
If you include the Greens, that gives you, and Rise, and anyway, there's at least 6 list-only pro-independent parties now, and I mean, it just makes you wonder. I tell you what struck me the other day, because I was reading about the DeHunt system, the additional member system that we've got here in Scotland for Holyrood. And apparently it's based on a system that they've been using in Germany since their constitution was set up after World War II. And the Free Democrats, who've managed to, they're the kind of Lib Dems of German politics, they've managed to get involved in coalition after coalition over the years from either side. And they've never, ever, in 60 years, sat for a constituency. So I think can I just say one last thing? I think we should look to somewhere like that, with all the experience they've got, for some advice on what to do in Scotland. In what sense? I like to look abroad for comparative information.
I'm sorry,
we spend far too much time analysing what's happened in this wee box of ours. We need to look abroad at times to find out where the solutions are.
I'd agree with you to an extent, Stuart.
What's the problem we're trying to solve?
Look at our own results. In 2011, the SNP won a majority by doing well on both this constituency and the list. In 2016, the SNP's list vote dropped and they lost list seats. Should the SNP get over 50% in both, which is where they're polling right now, they will win a huge majority, and it will be a massive slap in the face to every unionist that tells you there is no demand for an independence referendum in Scotland.
So is that
I think we should campaign to get the SNP over 50%
all right,
in
Jimmy,
both votes.
is that the summary of this guy's article?
It's part of it, yeah. He's saying that there are complex reasons for why the Hunt part of the additional member system, it's a very complex algorithm. It's beyond my head. You know what I mean? I done higher maths, but the Hunt thing's beyond my abilities. But basically, if the SNP get over 50% in both, they will win around 70 seats on the possibly high 60s on the constituency, and they could win 15 or 16 seats in the list as well.
Well,
if they get 51% on the list, we're looking at least a dozen seats, and at that point,
on the figures I've seen, on the projections I've seen, they don't need list seats. They can win it on the constituency. Having said that, I'm a bit of a belt and braces man myself. So I'm at the moment, I'm definitely on the side of 2 votes SNP. I need to be convinced, and it would need to be a manifesto that I believed in to give my list vote to anybody other than the SNP. The more I hear about it, the messier it's beginning to look. And unless I have cast iron guarantees, i.e. I know exactly what constituencies they're going to stand in, and those constituencies don't look like being a risk to an SNP seat, they won't be getting my vote.
I think we need to take into consideration young people's possible voting intentions, and the Green Party. And the Green Party's argument will be, we've got no chance of getting into power, into get elected unless you vote for us on the lists. And there's a lot of young people who are Green, and to be honest, they might put climate change ahead of independence in their priorities.
I think, Stuart, you could be right. You know, people forget with what's happened with COVID and everything, but people forget just how high up the agenda the environment was a year and a half ago, just how big Extinction Rebellion was, and just how many young people got involved with Extinction Rebellion. And you know yourself, mate, when you're young and you first start getting involved in campaigning and that, it's a heady old brew. I think the Green vote next year could be pretty big. And let's be honest, all these pollsters, when they reach out on their phone, they're phoning folk on landlines, mate. They're not getting to the young people and getting a genuine opinion of how, say, people between the ages of 16 and 25, how they're going to vote. I think you're right. I think the Greens could have a pretty good election next year.
I hope not.
Yeah, I would love to. I'd love to see the back end of Ross Greer, mate. Well, sorry, the back of Ross Greer, not the back end. That came out really bad.
You didn't really mean to say that, Jimmy.
I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to say that, mate.
I still don't trust them.
I think
I've tried really hard, and to be honest, recently, apart from some of the stupid policies that are in their manifesto, but every time we're looking for them to support independence, I get a wee shiver down my back.
There's a price for everything, mate. There's a price for absolutely everything with the Greens, and sometimes you wonder just how freak show their price is going to turn out to be. You know, I remember talking to a couple of Save the Dolphin folk back in the day, and some of the stuff that they came out with was, I'd call it laughable. I'd just call it so naive as to be laughable. We live in a country surrounded by huge underwater assets, and they're arguing that everything should be left in the sea. Not just oil, fish. Everything should be left in there, and you're like, well, hold it. It's going to get pretty busy down there if we didn't actually take fish out and stuff like that. What happens when the fish start jumping, growing legs, jumping and walking up the steps of Aberdeen Harbour and going, will somebody eat me because it's too busy down there?
I do sometimes wonder what the Green representation would look like if all those people who I know, I mean, I've done it myself. I have given them my second vote in the past. All those SNP folk that give them their list vote, if they just stop doing it, I wonder how the Greens would look then.
I'd be interested to see their manifesto for next year, mate. I think Alison Johnson's not a character I'm particularly impressed by, and I think Parliament doesn't do her any favours. She could probably do a better job doing something else. Paddy Harvey's maybe been there too long as well, and as I say, I'd cheerfully see the back of Ross Greer. I'd like to see some new blood in there, and I'd like to see Andy Whiteman's ideas on land reform forming a much bigger part of their policy, because when you look at land reform in Scotland, it needs pushing, and we maybe need more voices like Whiteman pushing it.
Yep, I don't disagree with any of that. Stuart, the Greens.
As I say, I think I voted Green myself on a list vote in the past. I'm thinking of, friends, young friends and relatives, and what they have voted. I remember last year's climate change march in Edinburgh. I'd never seen anything quite like it, because they were so young. Half of the people were school kids. Mm-hmm. But another aspect that just struck me. The other thing that struck me? It was down at Holyrood, and you know where the big flat area is, behind the Holyrood House itself. There was the most enormous sound system set up, far bigger than any Independence March. Huge thing, and I'm just curious to know where the money came from for
that. It came from Davos.
Greta Thunberg's pocket money. She saved up for a big stereo so that we could all have a Barry rave in Holyrood Park afterwards.
I don't have anything to add to that, guys. Anybody got anything would like to finish with?
Well, I think the First Minister had a good day yesterday. She was quite right to welcome Boris to Scotland, and she did well out of it. We've more or less said so I think in the UK press as well as in Scotland. So there you go.
And just to finish, another day where we had zero COVID deaths again today.
Oh, so very good.
Excellent news. Can anybody tell me why nobody thinks Scotland's doing better than England?
The care home deaths are supposed to be bigger because nobody in England, not even the writers in the Guardian and the Independent, seem to seriously challenge the statistics in England.
Have they explained the 50% of unexplained deaths then?
No, they've still not came up with a...
No, I'm sorry. They're supine, SUPINE, the English press.
Supine, SHIT.
If you insist.
Okay, guys, we'll call it a day at that. Thank you, Stuart Lockhead. Thanks, Jimmy Hutton. Thanks, Cheers. Jimmy Hutton. And I'm Norrie Stewart. We'll catch you all, not tomorrow. Tomorrow's Saturday, so we won't be speaking to you tomorrow, but we'll catch you on Sunday. Thanks for listening, folks. Cheers for now.